first, everyone thought the dog was just being loud, barking like crazy near an old forgotten field. But when firefighters finally arrived, they followed his desperate cries, only to discover something buried beneath the ground. A little girl trapped in a hidden well, clinging to life. And the only reason she was still alive was because the dog refused to give up. It started with a bark, sharp, frantic, and oddly rhythmic. Not the kind of bark a dog makes when chasing a squirrel or begging for a treat. No, this bark came from a place of desperation, and it didn't stop. The people of Willow Creek were used to quiet afternoons, especially in early spring. Retirees sipping tea on their porches, birds chirping from the maple trees, and the occasional hum of lawnmowers. But that day, it was the relentless barking of a scruffy German shepherd named Max that shattered the calm. He stood near the edge of the old Crawford property, a wide expanse of abandoned land, with wild grass and a half-collapsed barn. What caught everyone's attention was that Max never moved from that one spot. His fur bristled, tail low, and his eyes darted toward anyone who passed, as if pleading for help. At first, the neighbors dismissed it. Probably saw a fox, Mr. Tucker grunted, returning to his crossword puzzle. But Max didn't stop. For over an hour, he barked, howled, and paced in circles around a specific patch of grass. It wasn't until sweet Mrs. Jenkins from 2 doors down came walking her cat in a stroller, as she often did, that someone actually listened. "Something's wrong," she said, pulling out her old flip phone and dialing 911. "This dog, he's trying to tell us something." She had no idea how right she was. Earlier that afternoon, 7-year-old Emily Reed had been playing in the backyard of her grandmother's house. The yard backed up against the Crawford property, and though she'd been warned never to wander past the fence, curiosity had a way of winning out. She was chasing a butterfly. Just one more bounce, one more leap, and then the fence didn't seem like a barrier at all. She slipped through a gap and was gone in seconds. Her grandmother, Ruth, was inside making lemon bars. Thinking Emily was still playing beneath the bird feeder, she called out once or twice, but when there was no answer, she assumed the child had gone inside for her coloring book. By the time Ruth realized Emily wasn't in the house or the yard, nearly 40 minutes had passed. Panic began to crawl up her spine. She called Emily's name again and again. Still nothing. Meanwhile, just beyond the tall weeds of the Crawford land, Emily had stepped on what looked like a grassy patch. But beneath was a long-forgotten, covered-over well. The rotting wood gave way instantly. The ground collapsed. Emily screamed once, before plunging downward into darkness. No one heard her voice, but someone heard the bark. Max wasn't anyone's dog, not really. He had once belonged to a man who lived on the edge of Willow Creek. A Vietnam veteran named Walter Dawson. Walter passed away nearly a year ago, and when no family came to claim Max, the neighborhood tried to feed him when they could. But mostly he lived alone, watching, wandering. Still, Max never left Walter's old roots. Every morning he walked past the church, paused by the pond, then circled the Crawford property. Locals said it was as if he was still doing rounds with his late owner. That day, Max had wandered farther in than usual, and what he saw or sensed sent something primal into motion. He barked when Emily fell, barked louder when she didn't resurface, and when she cried for help through the narrow shaft of the well. Max stood over the opening and barked like his life depended on it, because hers did. When firefighters finally arrived after Mrs. Jenkins' call, Max didn't budge. He growled protectively when one of them stepped too close, then darted ahead, leading them toward the well. "What the?" one of the younger responders whispered as he reached the sunken spot in the ground. Then he heard it, barely a whimper. "Help, please." Immediately, the tone shifted. "This is Rescue Unit 4, the lead firefighter radioed. "We have a child down a narrow shaft, possibly a well. Initiate confined space protocol. We need all available support." Ruth arrived moments later, breathless and pale, clutching Emily's favorite stuffed rabbit. "They found her?" she gasped. "She's alive," a medic assured. Barely audible but conscious. That dog may have saved her life. Max sat by the edge, staring down, his ears twitching at every sound. And as the first rope descended into the darkness, he didn't stop watching, not for a second. The first firefighter down was 29-year-old Miguel Turner. He'd done tight rescues before, car wrecks, collapsed basements, but never an old stone well that hadn't seen the light of day in over 50 years. It was cold and narrow. The air smelled of mildew and earth, and damp moss clung to the stones like cobwebs. As his boots scraped along the walls during the slow descent, Miguel kept calling out, "Emily, can you hear me? My name is Miguel, I'm coming to get you." At first, just silence. Then a faint, trembling voice echoed back. "My foot hurts." He exhaled a shaky breath of relief. "You're doing great, sweetheart, just stay very still." Emily was wedged in a gap where the well narrowed. Her leg was twisted unnaturally, one arm scraped and bleeding. She looked up, eyes wide and wet, clinging to the wall. "Are you an angel?" she asked. Miguel smiled, even though his eyes stung with emotion. "Close enough, let's get you home." Above ground, it felt like time stood still. The rescue team set up floodlights as night crept in. News crews arrived, along with more neighbors. Mrs. Jenkins brought out a thermos of cocoa, and Pastor Will from the local church began quietly praying with Ruth. Max still hadn't moved. Even the mayor showed up, whispering to reporters, "This dog, he's a hero." He refused to give up. Deep below, Miguel carefully secured Emily in a sling. "We're going up now, sweetheart. You'll see the stars again." The ascent was slow, agonizingly so. The pulley groaned, the harness creaked, and then her fingers appeared first. Then her small face, peeking over the rim like a flower blooming from the soil. A cheer erupted from the crowd. Ruth burst into tears and rushed forward. But the medics took over. Emily was cold, bruised, and dehydrated, but she was alive. And her first words? "Where's the doggy?" They let Max approach the ambulance before it drove off. Emily, bundled in thermal blankets, stretched out a tiny hand. Max pressed his wet nose against her fingers. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. The on-scene medic choked back tears. The town of Willow Creek hadn't had a hero story in years, and now a scruffy, half-forgotten German shepherd, who'd once been called just a stray, was now the reason a little girl was still breathing. That night, a picture of Max sitting at the edge of the well went viral on social media. "Dog saves girl from abandoned well" became a headline across dozens of news outlets. But in Willow Creek, no one cared about the internet. They were just grateful for the dog that barked and didn't stop. By the next morning, Max had been given more treats than he could eat. But one thing remained uncertain. Who would take him in? That answer came from Ruth. She stood at the hospital window, with Emily beside her in a wheelchair. "You know," she said softly, "I think our family has room for one more." Emily beamed. "Can we call him Max the Brave?" The vet gave Max a clean bill of health. A little underweight, a few ticks, but otherwise a remarkably resilient dog. That evening, Max walked into his new home, tail wagging, and immediately curled up by Emily's bed. He didn't know it, but he was no longer forgotten. He was family. 2 days later, a county inspection crew returned to the Crawford property. It turned out the well wasn't even on the official records. It had been sealed in the 1960s and forgotten since. Over time, grass had grown over the boards, and no one knew the danger lurking beneath. "We were lucky," one official told the local news. If that dog hadn't noticed something was wrong, this story would have ended very differently. The town council quickly voted to secure the entire Crawford land, fencing it off and posting warning signs. But what people talked about more was how Max had known. Some said dogs had a sixth sense. Others believed Max was still following orders from his late owner, Walter, who had also once been a fireman. Maybe he remembered what Walter would have done, Mrs. Jenkins mused. Or maybe he just knew that little girl needed him. Whatever the reason, Max's actions had turned him into a local legend. The rescue changed something in Willow Creek. People who barely spoke to one another before were suddenly knocking on doors, checking in on elderly neighbors, sharing casseroles and cups of tea. At Sunday church, Pastor Will dedicated his entire sermon to loyalty. and listening, not just to voices, he said, but to those who cannot speak. Sometimes a bark is a cry from God. Emily returned home from the hospital in a tiny wheelchair with balloons tied to the handles. When she saw Max waiting at the gate, she giggled through her bandaged lip and held her arms out wide. Max rushed to her, nuzzling her gently, then lay down and placed his head in her lap. Like a soldier back from duty, people wept openly. Even gruff Mr. Tucker brought over a basket of dog biscuits and muttered, "Never thought I'd cry over a mutt." The story of Max and Emily reached far beyond Willow Creek. Letters poured in from all across the US, Canada, and the UK. A retired firefighter from Leeds wrote, "We had a dog like that in our unit back in the 70s. You're lucky to have him." A couple from Nova Scotia sent Emily a hand-knit blanket with paw prints. "So you'll always be warm," the note read. Like Max kept you safe. Even a TV show producer called to ask if they could feature Max in a special about heroic animals. Ruth kindly declined. "He doesn't need fame, he's already our star." Meanwhile, Max got a new red collar, with his name embroidered in gold stitching, Max the Brave. And Emily insisted on walking him every evening, wheelchair and all. Wherever they went, cars slowed, windows rolled down, and people waved. Max became more than a dog. He was a symbol of what it meant to never give up. 1 month later, the town gathered at the newly fenced Crawford property for a special ceremony. Right beside the sealed well, they unveiled a small bronze plaque in honor of Max the Brave, whose voice brought a little girl back to the light. Emily held Max's leash, her cast now removed, her small hand gripping tightly as the crowd applauded. Ruth wiped away tears and squeezed her granddaughter's shoulder. And just as the sun dipped below the trees, Max let out one soft bark, just one. As if saying, "I was just doing what had to be done." The crowd went quiet, and then someone began clapping. Within seconds, everyone joined in. In the town of Willow Creek, no one would ever ignore a barking dog again. And a little girl, once lost in the dark, would forever remember the furry angel who refused to leave her behind.